please join us and tell us a little bit about yourself and perhaps introduce the speaker and get us going.
Yeah, so my name is Dan Roeder, and I am the Chief Academic Officer for the David Z Foundation, where we transform lives through the magic of music. And I am very, very pleased to introduce you to Stephen Aiano. And I practiced your name 14 times, and I'll see if I'll say it right. You have to be honest to me when I bring you up. But I just want to say we're in for a treat for this discussion about curriculum. And we're really looking at curriculum for a lot of different areas behind it. I am personally very interested in differentiation and how we can take a curriculum and modify and adapt it and make sure that it is accessible. But Stephen, I think, is going to take us a little bit deeper into the design and the implementation and all of this magical world of curriculum and how it ties together to create an inclusive experience for all students. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic to you, Stephen. And did I say your name right or no?
Just perfect.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're kind.
All right, I'm passing it off to you.
Thank you so much. And really just to begin by saying it's such a privilege and a joy to be with everybody here as part of the Global Inclusive Education Summit for 2024 under the Rotary Club of World Disability Advocacy. Just very briefly to introduce myself, my name is Stephen. Before entering education, I worked as a civil servant in the UK and in Africa and the Middle East for a UK NGO. I've served in pretty much every category of school: selective, non-selective, special, co-ed, single sex, boarding, day, senior, junior, even nursery. In the classroom, I was an English teacher for 15 years. I was the head of a boarding and day school. I've trained new heads in the UK and senior European teachers under the EU Erasmus Plus programme. And I'm now the Group Curriculum Director at Cavendish Education, which is a family of 14 schools educating some 1,600 neurodivergent students between the ages of 5 and 21. Each Cavendish school has a unique profile and a unique community of students, falling broadly into the categories of specific learning difficulties, SPLD, autism, AC, social, emotional, and mental health, SEMH. So although I speak at this moment from a special schools environment, what I say applies directly and equally to inclusive mainstream schools, and I hope across the world. And listening to the summit so far today, I may well reflect some of the themes that have already been articulated. To provide a little context, here are a few key features of the educational and social circumstances in the UK for you to compare and contrast with your own. Right now, the UK educational system for special needs is struggling. Nearly 1 in 5 UK students has some form of acknowledged special educational need. Post-COVID, more children are reaching early years without the expected level of speech, language, and communication development. So there's an ever-increasing pipeline. Government funding for special education maxed out long ago. Teachers and other classroom staff can be thin on the ground and of mixed quality. Outcomes for special needs students nationally are poor. Fewer than 20% of UK adults with an autism diagnosis are in any paid employment. That figure is only 6% for people with a learning disability known to their local authority. I suspect that I'm mirroring something of what many of you are experiencing. And before we get to the meat and potatoes of this slot, let's briefly mention words. Different countries and different sectors within education use a variety of everyday and technical terms in respect of education generally and of inclusive and special education in particular. The definitions and resonances of words can vary enormously. We can use different words to describe the same thing, and using the same word, we can mean different things by it. At Cavendish, we try, at least internally, to adopt a vocabulary that helps point in the right direction. Here's one example. Many of the external organizations and people we engage with use the term ASD, autism spectrum disorder. The word autism is fine. But if I'm a young autistic person, it's not so helpful to me to be told that I'm defined as someone who has a disorder. It suggests that my autism might be a species of disorderliness on my part, when that's plainly not the case. Even the word spectrum is problematic, suggesting that autism is a linear condition, better at one end and worse at the other. No, it's a complex, multidimensional and dynamic phenomenon with its own values. So this talk comes with a lexical health warning, as I suspect does the whole summit. And I'm happy to be in dialogue afterwards with anyone here attending the summit to clear up any confusion resulting from language, should that be helpful. So the topic I've been given today is the effective, inclusive education curriculum. When I train head teachers, I often stress that crucial to their role as head is what I call permanent ecosystem management. Every school, every class, every colleague, every student is a newly developed, unique creature freshly presented to us every day. The set of students and staff making up the school, rather like the component elements of a coral reef, multiple organisms as a single entity, is constantly mutating. So leaders of schools must constantly fine-tune the curriculums they create and deliver to ensure that they are in harmony with the often subtle shifts in their community and its members. Indeed, let me just further redefine the word curriculum, if only for our purposes today. The good old Oxford English Dictionary defines it as a regular course of study. But for me, while it does include that, it extends well beyond. For me, it means every single interaction that we have with our students. No, more than that. It means every moment of a student's experience while under our responsibility, which includes not just being on the receiving end of, say, a biology lesson on a Tuesday morning, but also queuing with my peers at lunchtime, or even just going down an empty corridor at break time. Formal moments and informal moments, curriculum, supervised time and unsupervised time, curriculum, everywhere, curriculum. So while I shall focus principally on the formal dimension, please keep the non-formal dimension in your mind. Now, what you might regard as my crazily wide definition of curriculum has various implications. And there's one implication I need to get out front and center. And that is that there is no single correct curriculum in either the restricted or the extended sense of the word. There is no single correct curriculum that must be adopted. There's no curricular silver bullet. So in some ways, I want to fundamentally challenge our conventional sense of what curriculum is. In Greek mythology, Procrustes forced his visitors to fit an iron guest bed he'd made for them, either by chopping off their limbs if they were too big for the bed, or by stretching them if they were too small. Disastrous either way. An inflexible, predetermined, imposed curriculum is a Procrustean bed for our students. And I want to speak strongly, but pragmatically against that. And what I shall do is try to tease out some key approaches for you when you create a curriculum and think a little bit about how you evolve it. So we're now entering the first core part of this slot. The Cavendish website, not written by me, says, at the heart of Cavendish education is a commitment to enabling all our students to thrive when they're with us and after they leave us. Empowering students with confidence in their own abilities and worth is a crucial driver of the Cavendish education. Now, as I scan across the special education horizon, I often see a set of professionals overwhelmingly focusing their attention and the students' attention on the learning difficulties, the barriers, the disabilities of the students. And in very many ways, that's exactly as it should be. Except that that needs focus is necessary but not sufficient. Our function is to be the expert at supporting and guiding students as they address those difficulties. But at exactly the same time, we should at least equally be the expert at identifying and optimizing the value of the unique strengths of our students. There's a caravan metaphor I sometimes use. Just run with it. You're in a car towing a caravan or a heavy trailer. What do you do if the caravan starts to sway or snake? First of all, what should you not do? Do not snatch at the wheel to try to compensate. Sharp changes of direction make things worse. Do not hit the brakes. Hard braking increases snaking. Do keep the car pointing forward. Do very gently start to accelerate. If you create and maintain a controlled acceleration, the caravan falls back into line and you make good progress. Here's a tiny example. Early in my teaching career in an inclusive mainstream school was a boy aged 14, severely dyslexic, who struggled with his place in the school community for lots of reasons. One day, by pure happen chance, I gave him the part of a funny policeman in a school play. And many of my very best actors over the years have been seriously dyslexic. He did brilliantly. His peers admired his performance on stage, and through it, he at last gained their respect. His whole self-identity was transformed. He began to gain a sense of a place in the community that he had never had. He started to engage with educational tasks and to achieve in ways that had been impossible for him. His barriers were still there, but he became enabled. For me, it is absolutely critical that we search for the strengths of our students and focus on them. If the caravan is wobbling, don't slam on the brakes, find the accelerator. So here's principle number one. Your curriculum must ensure that you find the strengths of a disabled, disadvantaged SEN student and drive those strengths forward. And this leads us straight to principle two, which is all about asking the right questions before we begin to create a curriculum. As a teacher, when I first encounter a new group of students, I don't simply launch into some pre-existing scheme of work or syllabus. My first task is to understand my students. So principle two, properly understand each student from the word go. There's no point in teaching inappropriate materials in an inappropriate way to the wrong person. The what and how I teach should be determined by whom I am teaching. Ask the who question as far as you can, even before the student comes on to roll. Your student admissions process is another separate topic, raising major but different questions beyond my remit today. Now, let's imagine that a student is newly enrolled at your school. Your first task is to evaluate that student, to baseline that student. And this baselining, I suggest, is likely to have a number of dimensions. Firstly, it's likely you'll have to do it for yourself. It's often problematic relying on others. Almost all Cavendish students arrive with something called an Education, Health and Care Plan, EHCP. That's an official UK document assembled by the local government. But like much formal paperwork associated with our students, EHCPs can be imperfect, incomplete, out of date, mutually incompatible with other documents. So characteristically, it's our responsibility as the school to make for each student our own independent, sufficient, professional evaluation of them. A full-barreled educational psychologist report on every applicant would be great, but can be costly and impracticable. We mostly have to perform the task for ourselves in a way that is simple, internally consistent, and pragmatic. It's the phrase, better roughly right than precisely wrong. So baselining for us consists of the following 4 core components. Assessments of innate capacity in terms of literacy and numeracy. Here, I don't need to find out whether a student has or has not been taught, let's say, improper fractions. That can come later. I need to find out their innate capacity, regardless of what they have so far been taught. You can choose from scores of available platforms. Thirdly and fourthly, assessments of learning style and personality type. You just need to find platforms that work for you, suited to the age and character of your students. There are plenty of tools out there. I then want to put these 4 measures, innate literacy, innate numeracy, personality, learning style, alongside the SEN diagnosis or diagnoses of each student to establish a concrete, specific definition of the core shape of each student and of their future potential. So I still don't construct my curriculum, not yet. Before I do that, I now need to project this student forward in time to adulthood. Principle 3, make an estimate in broad terms of what generic role in society each student should ideally be capable of filling. Here in England, I live near to 2 places. GCHQ, that's the British version of the US National Security Agency, and a canal. Now imagine, very simplistically, I have a student who has autism and a mind cognitively in the top 4th percentile. GCHQ is full of incredibly intelligent staffers who are autistic. So there is the kind of job my top percentile autistic student can have. Of course, my student needs to gain whatever skills and qualifications are required to access this sort of elite job. But as a school, I know what those skills and qualifications are or should be. And because I am an expert, I know how to deliver them. Now, imagine, still simplistically, a second student, also autistic, but with a very low cognitive capacity. On the canal near me, there are 2 canal locks that have to be manned to allow barges through. The job of the lockkeeper, an essential job, is highly repetitive, but highly responsible and respected. Both of those students can and should have an honored, functioning place in the world that is right for them. My point is that we should believe and we should build our curriculums upon the belief that our students all can have a place within society, a respected place of contribution, remuneration, dignity, worth. For most of our students, when they arrive, the messaging that they have previously received is concentrated on the things that have gone wrong, not on the things that have got right. The system has failed them, but they see themselves as having failed the system. And that impacts on their internal self-fulfilling narrative, on the story they tell themselves and about their prospects. We have to convincingly change that internal narrative through the curriculum. So do I say to each of these two students of mine, hey, sorry, mate, your chances of playing a meaningful and fulfilling role in society are pretty remote, not worth trying? Or do I say to them, I know just the kind of person you are, and that's fantastic because I can show you the roles that people like you can and do play in society. You have a future. We know how to get you there. Let's get on with it. We must always take the long view and the constructive view of our students. And we must actively communicate to them that long, constructive view. So now there are 3, maybe 4 things I want to say about curriculums. Firstly, a strange throwaway statement. In some important respects, it doesn't matter one jot what the precise content of a curriculum is. Confucius in Shandong, Avicenna in Bukhara, Benjamin Franklin in Boston, the content of the curriculums they each received could not have been more different. But they were all educated. So let's not get too hung up about the presence or absence of particular content items in a curriculum. In school, we have all the relevant student data. So now is the moment to create the curriculum that will take each student from where they are to where they can be. Each curriculum should be deliberately unique to that student with its own long-term outcome target. Let's not, like Procrustes, impose an inappropriate, ill-fitting curriculum on the wrong student. The right curriculum for the right student. I would dearly have wanted to discuss target setting and progress tracking, but such a huge topic will need another talk. An example, if you want one, is perhaps the PAGS profile assessment and goal setting platform, which Felicia Gibson, who chaired the first panel session, can tell you about. Let me offer you principle 4. Your curriculum is your pedagogy. In the words of Marshall McLuhan, the medium is the message. Without an appropriate and effective way of delivering it, the content of your curriculum is nothing. It's like being a shopkeeper who has a stocked warehouse, but no shop. For our students, conventional, mainstream style curriculums and teaching are failing them, usually because being neurodivergent, they think and operate in non-mainstream ways, and or their social relations and their social skills have inhibited their learning. If my difficulty lies not in my cognition, but in how I relate to the teacher and how I relate to my fellow students and how I self-regulate, then just piling more and more conventional curriculum content on me or abandoning me is simply no use. The absolute first core of my curriculum is to develop effective skills in relating to others and in self-regulation. Then and only then can I crack on with that cognition and learning stuff. So I'm now going to offer you a series of deeply considered concepts I'm calling side notes to those principles, and I hope they will stimulate thought and debate. And these side notes are united by the belief that it is possible to do everything with everything. And what I mean by that will emerge in the next few minutes. Side note 1. Curriculum is an integrated balance of personal skills, academic skills, practical skills, content. Covering content without forming academic, practical, personal skills is absurd. And skills without content is pointless. But skills must come early. I once taught A-level English. That's a high-stakes terminal exam taken at the age of 18 after a course of 5 teaching terms studying demanding set literary texts. The curriculum content was the set texts. But for the first 3 terms of study, I never touched them. We did totally other stuff. Fun, apparently random, actually highly structured other stuff to ensure that the hard grind of skills development happened in safe and different places. And then come the 4th term, total joy when we did get to address the set texts. By then, the students had the skills they needed to breeze through the curriculum content with an astonishing mastery, freshness, and independence. You can do everything with everything. Side note 2, think about therapy as education and education as therapy. All of our schools make therapeutic provision for the students, but we have moved away from a disconnected model where therapy and education and curriculum are alongside but too separate from one another. We've shifted to a much more connected model where the teaching, the curriculum, is informedly therapeutic and where therapy is educative. You can do everything with everything. Side note 3. Outdoor education is magic. You can and should deploy outdoor education as a key vehicle for curricular delivery. Maths, physics, engineering, biology, ecology, botany, geology, geography, art, history, English, drama, nutrition, they're all better if, at least in part, students engage with them outdoors. And you'll all have your own versions of the UK's Duke of Edinburgh Awards scheme, the Combined Cadet Force, many, many other excellently structured, progressively certificated programs that take students out of that classroom where for hours on end they are cabin, cribbed, confined, bound in by us. Your curriculum should enable and require your students to engage directly with the real physical world and the real social world. Mens sana in corpore sano, a healthy mind in a healthy body. Just one indicator, by the age of 10, in the UK, 37% of children are overweight or obese. It's bad now, and it's bad for the future. So we are starting to prioritize target-focused physical education as part of the curriculum in its own right. And at another summit, we might address what nutritional psychiatry tells us. Animals in the outdoors. Our schools increasingly prioritize animal care in a way that is responsibility-focused and qualification-focused. Students working with animals build empathy, practice responsibility, learn how to gain trust and build relationships. One of our schools is actually a working farm. You can do everything with everything. Side note 4. Language and social communication are vital for our students. Our schools are encouraged to foreground the performing and creative arts in their curriculums, including music, drama, art, photography, film, and also modern foreign languages. For autistic students, these activities provide a strong foundation of non-nuanced, non-figurative communication. With drama, coded, nuanced, and figurative communication, involving safe, purposeful group interactions. One of our autism schools even teaches British Sign Language to all students. It's beautiful. And it's brought an astonishing subtlety and quietness to communication in the school. And as just one main example, music is brilliant at showing how it is possible to do everything with everything. Let me dwell on this just a little. I happen to play the flute. Now, what would it be like if I were a young autistic student with issues including motor skills, social interaction, coding? Now, the flute is very physical. It involves the whole body, diaphragm and lungs, the balance system, the mouth cavity, tongue, lips, ears, eyes, fine motor skills, fingers, everything, all at once. To play the flute, I have to do sustained practice, generic practice of the fine motor skills of routine scales and so on, practice of the integration of the whole body, specific practice of ensemble pieces. And when I play with others, I have to read and connect in two very different ways. I read the printed music, not just mechanically, but musically, reading the articulation of the notes, the phrasing, pitch, tone, dynamics, rhythm, connecting with what the dots on the page really intend. And I read my fellow musicians. I read them orally with my ears to hear what and how they're playing. And I read them visually to interpret what their spontaneous physical cues are telling me. If I make a mistake, I have to work to realign my playing with theirs. We have to help one another. We have to connect. It's well known from research that students who follow a music curriculum characteristically have higher standardized test scores and better outcomes, and that music curriculums are closely linked to cognitive enhancement because of those transferable skills such as discipline, concentration, time management, mutual learning. Playing in an ensemble, singing in a choir, requires individual dedication and shared cooperation and perseverance. Music curriculums boost creativity, beneficial in problem solving and creative thinking across all subjects and activities. They address issues such as processing auditory information, phonetic competence. Reading sheet music involves decoding symbols and translating them into actions. And the rhythmic dimension of music assists auditory processing. It addresses problematic visual processing, decoding, quantitative and ratio management. With its inherent mathematicality, combined with the practical kinesthesia of performance, music provides a unique means of improving mathematical understanding. Rhythmic patterns, type signatures, cross rhythms, transposition, modulation, they all involve mathematical principles that give students a better grasp of numbers and how they combine. Music is the gift that keeps giving. The structured nature of music theory requires abstract thinking and pattern recognition. That enhances logic and problem-solving skills. The appreciation of diverse musical styles and cultures, discovery of connections between apparently very different genres, encourages open-mindedness and cultural awareness. It fosters a well-rounded, empathetic individual. Therapeutically, music offers students emotional and psychological benefits. Its power to evoke and shape emotions enables students to learn to identify and channel their feelings constructively. The collaborative nature of music making strengthens social bonds, reduces feelings of alienation. This sense of inclusion and shared purpose, characterized by cooperation and peer support, profoundly impacts on students' self-worth, on their sense of belonging within the school community, on their life capabilities. Music is magic. You can do everything with everything. Side note 5. Computers and compost. Someone I much respect recently remarked that only 2 things matter today: computers and compost. And he's right. We have earlier glanced implicitly at compost in our previous remarks on outdoor education. And it goes without saying that we must maximally digitally upskill every young person. The Cavendish schools are launching a structured upgrading of all students' digital skills using a formal digital competence framework. And with emerging AI today, we stand right on the threshold of opportunities to provide absolutely personalized, accelerated learning programs and curriculums for individual students bespoke to them. In parallel, we've launched a digital skills competency framework for all staff members. Side note 6. Essentials are essential. Curriculum content cannot be plowed through without the basics. Another very quick anecdote. In 2020, the schooling of a young family member of mine was near collapse. He was close to being functionally innumerate, and then COVID hit. So I taught him maths online. And at the start, every response he gave me was either, I don't know, or I can't remember. But the core of his maths problem was that he'd never mastered basic number manipulation. And without the basics, all other mathematical activity was inaccessible to him. So we did multiplication tables, division tables, mental arithmetic. Our curricular content was nothing else, but we did it sitting, standing, dancing, speaking, singing, laughing, crying, anyway. And after several extraordinary, highly repetitive, but joy-filled weeks, he started to master the art of number manipulation. The impossible had been achieved. Suddenly, he could freely and effectively address previously inaccessible mathematical activities, which liberated him not just in maths, but also in other subjects. Essentials are essential. So let me end by briefly recapping what I want to say about curriculum building for inclusive education in mainstream schools and for specialist schools alike. Feel free, please, to question and challenge anything. Each curriculum should be personalized to consciously reflect the strengths and flight path requirements of each student. Each curriculum should be founded on who and what each student is. Should use that understanding to predicate a meaningful life goal with and for each student. Should use that understanding and that life goal to configure their personalized curriculum, and should recognize that curriculum without pedagogy is nothing. Never be procrustes. As you build your personal curriculums, I encourage you for yourself to reflect on how everything in school is curriculum, how best to integrate skills and content within your curriculum, on how therapy and education can best coexist and even coalesce, on the magic of the outdoors and of the living world, on the centrality of language and communication, on the engulfing digital universe that's coming towards us, on what is truly essential, on how you can do everything with everything to enable our students to be fully resourced, fully living, fully engaged members of society. Thank you very much.
Wow, Stephen, do I know a cue when I hear one? Just like that resounding cadence to what you just said of you can do everything with everything. And that was such a beautiful spine to this whole conversation. And now I kind of know why we're matched up as moderator and speaker, because you just ended with this powerhouse evidence base on music. And that's obviously one of my passions, as you know. But just within the context of that baseline assumption of you can do everything with everything, I think there is a call that we have as all educators, but I think certainly special educators are just kind of have this as a norm, that you're going to get extra pieces thrown into the puzzle every day, and then you're going to have some pieces that break a little, and then some pieces that have to be reshaped. and reformed. And I think those four protocols that you just went through and reviewed so beautifully really back up the statement that you can do everything with everything. So we just have to first see the humans in the room. And this is all about curriculum. But I loved what you said, that the curriculum, in your definition, it's not this just a regular unit of study, but it's every single interaction we have with our students. Our curriculum is us, and our curriculum is them. It's the global us. Yeah, right? Yeah. No, so yeah, this is if you're seeing this later on my social media feeds, you're like, yeah, this is kind of what Dan does. I am so invested in that statement that we can see the humans in the room, and then we can do anything and everything. Everything is possible. But the one thing that I've actually been really having a lot of conversations about lately is that we have to have this mechanism where we're inspiring and scaffolding that success for the student after they leave. That's one of the things that I really picked up and keyed in on at the beginning, because you said that an effective curriculum is that course of study while they're with us and after. So it's the and after that they have to then realize they can do everything with everything, and all possibilities are open, and just make that assumption that yes, and here's how I'm going to do it. So you fill in the blanks. We do have a few questions from our audience. Brigitta, sorry if I mispronounced it, is asking on the inclusivity of deaf students. And this is a question that I have as well. The access to language is the first, here's the question, I'll just read it out. They need access to language first, the first thing in their life, in order to be able to learn. How do they access the general curriculum? Today's model using sign language interpreter alongside English captions helps with access to the presentation, and thankful for that. But how do you propose accessibility for all deaf people, especially my big question is with music and in this integration, this inclusion of doing everything with everything. So I think that's a great question.
And it's a great one, and I immediately put my hand up to it being well beyond my area of knowledge and competence. But I think it's a really significant question for if you have a deaf student, they have a very substantial barrier, because that whole language thing is critical to my personal development. And if I have inhibitions, however they may be manifest in my capacity to interchange. I mean, as I say, one of our schools is now teaching every single child British Sign Language, and I think that's a glorious thing, because I think as a society we are not very adept at thinking how we can connect to people. And actually there was a very interesting session earlier in the summit about assistive technology, and I might point the questioner a little bit down there as well, because there was some valuable comments and thoughts and ideas were being proposed there. But there are even in music, one of the critical parts of music, of course, is rhythm, and there's a little bit of a root in there. And I wouldn't want to pretend to be remotely an expert, but I'm very sure there are lots of different ways, because I do totally believe that you can do everything with everything. There are lots of different ways that you can find to make connections, and it's all about making connections. However, whatever that connection is, and whatever the root of the connection is, above all, that's what it is.
Yeah, I want to kind of extrapolate on that a little bit. And I think this opens up the broader question of a word that you brought up early on in the presentation as well, of appropriateness. And I've been always just wondering, what is this word appropriateness, and how do we decide it as a team? Because it's such a subjective word, but it's written into the law, at least in the US, so many times, where we're saying, what is appropriateness? And so I think that kind of opens up a little bit the question a bit broader. is how do we, not look for all the answers of every situation, but instead we look to the student and say, what do you need? What is appropriate for you?
Yeah. Well, not only just what you need, but what is your possibility? I think the bit I would really want above all to emphasize is that what we should be doing above all is identifying what that capacity of that young person is. What are the things that they can do given half a chance? If we can get some of the stuff right, if we are the expert at overcoming barriers, what's that innate capacity? And over many years, I've seen so many young people who have either been written off or have been given unreasonably low expectations. And it's no good putting in high expectations if you haven't got the means of making the journey, of doing the traveling.
Right.
But if you build your flight path, I mean, that's a current term in the UK. If you build your flight path not on what's the system out there, you have to take account of what the system is out there. What are the exam structures? What are the available options, and so on and so forth. But you have to start with where this young person is. Where are they at? Where can they be? What are their issues? Okay, now let's go. And that's for me is the way forward. And I think, again, I don't know what it's like for the rest of the world, but so many of these young people are given these really very negative messages right the way through their formative years. They're explicit messages and implicit messages. Sometimes the implicit messages about you're not very good are more damaging even than the explicit ones. They kind of go in deeper.
And it was, I think you did such a great job of pre-teaching that idea in your was it lexical health warning. I love that phrase. I definitely will use that and attribute it to you, of course. But just where it's the language that we choose in speaking about limitations. And often what I've noticed just in teaching special education in the US, there's especially, I'll be speaking later with Dr. Myrie about post-secondary preparation and what things look like for what, how do we navigate that very, very important transition in life where we have a gradual release of responsibility from on your parent or your teacher to you're now in the world, and how are you going to find that agency for yourself? And so I think one of the things that I was thinking of when Bridgetta first asked that question, and thank you for your pronunciation in the chat, in the question and answer, Bridgetta. I immediately thought of this Cambodian folktale, and it's called Silent Lotus. Of course I did. It's called Silent Lotus, and I learned about it on the show Reading Rainbow. And it's about a girl who grew up, she was deaf and nonverbal, but she loved to dance. And so that was her strength. And I loved how you also said, let's look at the strengths and what can we do from there? If we start prescribing a pathway, and that's our language in the US is pathway or career path, something like that, like the flight path. I kind of like that. But if we start being prescriptive instead of descriptive of what their interests are and how we can help them equip themselves, then that's where we start getting into that. This is not appropriate for this student because they're learning the things that they're spending time learning things that won't yield results, but they could be spending that time where we maybe look at a modification, we look at adjusting the curriculum. And you remember, folks, we're talking about curriculum here. We're talking about how this needs to be a living, breathing organism, and the nature of the classroom is being able to say, well, that's not appropriate for this student, and how can we change that? So anyway, in this story. She grows up being told, well, you can't dance, you can't hear the music. And so she just proved them wrong. And that's where you start with that baseline assumption of, well, yes, I can. So she had her ear to the ground and she was feeling the vibrations and listening in her own way to the music and engaging in the dance. And then the end of the story is she becomes the court's most beloved dancer. So that's the story that I think we need to assume is possible from the beginning. Just my opinion.
And that's a very lovely story, and a much less lovely thought that came into my head, only because it's about trains, really, which are not delightful. There's a kind of recurrent trope, and it has a kind of truth that particularly young autistic males in England really love transportation systems, and there's an element of truth in that. But I could teach you almost any topic through transportation systems.
Mm-hmm.
I really could.
Yes.
But you could give me another. There was another boy who was extraordinarily keen on medieval castles. I could also teach you anything through medieval castles. The precise, as I say, the content is almost immaterial.
Yeah.
You can take almost anything and use it for whatever the purpose is that you want.
Take everything and do everything. I love that. Well, and what that says to me is we can instead, one of the amazing patterns and developments in education is that we're really starting to look at engagement and look at interest of all students. And that's from a universal design perspective. And if we just focus instead on, I need to teach you this standard, or I need to teach you this set of principles, or I need to teach you this equation, instead of focusing on that, say, what is the intersection of this equation and transportation systems, or of this equation and your medieval castles? How can we create environments in our classroom? And this is a question for all teachers. And also thinking from, I'm putting on my teacher hat. One of our charges is to differentiate all learning for all students. That's an exhausting task if you take it on by yourself. But when we collaborate with our students and parents, it's a lot easier.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And can I really loved a little remark you made, which echoes another one of my motifs. You know how you end up at a certain age with a whole set of motifs that you deploy, and one of them is that that teaching is really just the same as parenting, in the sense that you've succeeded when the young person doesn't need you anymore.
Yep.
When
teach yourself out of a job.
When you've taught yourself out of a job, when you've even parented yourself out of a job, and when your child comes back afterwards and they're still prepared to be interested in you, that's amazingly wonderful. But that's great. But the task is not to retain residual dependency. The task is to give total freedom. And then away you go. And then, of course, and the other thing, actually, I really loved, there was a little bit earlier, some reference to relationships and the power of relationships. And I would put that right in the middle of pedagogy there as well. That getting the relationships right is right at the heart of your curriculum as well, which is why my Procrustes Greek myth.
Yeah, exactly.
Lopping off the list.
Well, and I see we have Jeremy back, which is our visual cue that we're wrapping up. But it's been such a delight having this conversation with you, and your presentation was fascinating. And I even had it ahead of time, but I still took tons of notes. So thank you for sharing those thoughts, and so well presented.
Thank you very much. Thank you for everything. Thank you to the Rotary Club.